Okay, so again, this is a Supervisor Basics class. We'll be covering the basic items that supervisors would need to do in the system on a day-to-day basis. And we're going to be covering it through the web portal. So right up on my screen now, you can see that we have the web portal login page here. And this is where you would go to enter your username and your password. Okay, when I log in, that's going to bring us to our screen here. Our setup is that we have a bar across the top with our different menu items. And these menu items will populate options into our sidebar here at the left. And this area here is where our screens will show up. So whether we're viewing a schedule or putting in a day off request or whatever it is that we're doing, this is where we'll be doing that work. Okay. We're going to start by talking about some of the ways that you can view the schedule from the web. And those are all going to be found here under the View Schedule menu. First one we're going to look at is the daily schedule. Our daily schedule is going to show us up to 6 blocks per page, with each block representing a shift for your department. So in this case here, we have a day shift, a night shift, a detective bureau, PD administration, and records. In each shift, we have a list of names of people that are scheduled to be working that day, along with their title. And to the right of that would be a spot where we would see any job assignment that was given to that person for that day. Over on the right, we have a space for details. There's a number of different items that you might see in the details area. One example would be if somebody had their start and end time adjusted. Maybe they were going to come in a little bit late and stay a little bit late, or come in early and leave early. If we adjust their start and end times, that will show here under the details section. Also, if somebody is on a day off or somebody's working overtime that day, we'll see in that details section a code that indicates either what type of time off they're on or what's the reason for the overtime that they're working. And that details area can also be used to show comments. We can add comments to the schedule next to someone's name, maybe a note about something that person is doing that day, or something along those lines. Okay. Up at the top here, we see the date. This is always going to be today's date that we start with. We have some arrows here that will let us go ahead a day or back a day. We have double arrows that will let us go ahead a week or back a week. And if we could click this calendar button, that will open up a calendar. We can just choose the day that we want to view and jump right to that date. Okay, some departments may have a number of different daily schedule views that have been set up for them. If you do, you can open up this drop down here and you would see the names of those different views. So maybe your department has a patrol view and an investigations view. Or maybe there's a communications view. You would see those listed here, and you could go to them just by clicking on them, and that would go to that view. It's also possible that some views have more than one page. My department might have more than 6 shifts, and maybe we want to keep them all on one schedule profile. So we would put those on a second page, and we could click this button here to go to that next page if there were any additional shifts there. If not, then clicking this button will do nothing. And if you are a department that has a large number of pages on your view, this home button will always bring you back to the first page of that schedule layout. And the last couple of options here, show work times and show off times. Those can be used when you see an employee who has a day off on the schedule. If somebody has a day off entry and I click show off times, it will show me the start and end time of their time off. If I click show work times, it will show me the hours that they are actually working. Okay. And this validate button here, if your department has set up minimum staffing rules, then if you click this validate button, the system will check your schedule and your staffing against those rules, and it will change the color of any shift that might be failing those rules. So we can see both of these shifts are currently failing our minimum staffing levels. Okay, so that's our daily schedule. Next one I'll show you is a weekly schedule. Weekly schedule is set up by group. So whatever group I'm a part of, that's what loads up first. And I see a list of names of people that are part of that group. And then to the right, I can see their schedule for the week. I can see when they're working or when they have their regular days off. And time off entries will start to populate on here as well. Now, maybe I want to look at a group other than my group. I can do that by using the drop-down here. I can choose a different group to look at, and I will see their schedule for the week. The week that I'm currently viewing is whatever week contains this date up here. So if I want to look at next week, I just open up the calendar here and I pick any day next week. And that will change this view here to show the schedule for that week. Okay, that's our weekly schedule. We also have a monthly schedule that works in a very similar fashion. Again, whatever group I'm a part of, that's what loads up first. I see the people who are part of that group, and I see when they're working and when they're off. We have a little bit less room here, so we use a single letter abbreviation to indicate what shift they're working when they are working. And my time off items will start to populate on here as well, again using the single letter abbreviation. And just like with weekly, I can choose a different group to look at. And whatever month I'm viewing, or whatever month is shown up here is the month that I'm viewing. So again, I can pick a day in a different month, and then I will see the schedule for that month. Okay, so those three views let us see a number of people at one time. The other two views, they're calendar views. They let us look at one person at a time. First one is a monthly calendar. This lets me see the schedule for one person at a time. I can see when they're working, when they're off. Time off and overtime entries will start to populate on this view using the color code down here. I have some arrows here that I can use to go ahead a month or back a month. This button will always bring me back to the current month. And this drop-down will let me choose a month that I want to view and jump ahead to that month. And then there's also an option here to select to view a monthly calendar for other employees. The final view is the yearly calendar. Again, this is only going to show one person at a time. It's actually hard-coded to just show the yearly calendar for the person who is logged in currently. So this would be my my yearly calendar. Shows me when I'm working, when I'm off. And again, time off and overtime entries will start to fill in using the color key that you see up here. Okay. So those are the 5 different ways you can view the schedule from the web. Does anybody have any questions about those views, how they work, or what types of information they show? Okay. I don't see any questions coming through, so we'll move along here. Now that we've talked about how you can view the schedule, let's talk about some of the changes you can make to the schedule as a supervisor. Now, most of those items that we're going to work on today are going to come from one of 2 places. Either they'll be found in the supervisor menu, or they'll be found in a menu that we get when we have the daily schedule up and we click on someone's name. We call these schedule actions, and they're kind of specific to either the person or the shift that we clicked on. So again, most of what we do today is going to be found in one of those 2 sections there. First topic we'll talk about is assigning people to their jobs or other schedule details that we might assign people to on the schedule. So to do that, we're going to go into the supervisor menu. And we're going to use the option for update schedule details. Okay, that's going to bring up this screen here. Up top, we have an area where we can choose the employee that we're working with. Right here, we can choose what do we want to assign to this person. Do we want to assign schedule details like cars or radios? Or do we want to assign job assignments? And then down here, date. This is where we can choose what month we're working with. On the calendar, it's going to populate with that employee's schedule for that month, represented by these kind of pinkish blocks here. And to assign these items, I can go over to this column and I can take an item, I can drag it over to the day I want to assign it. So I could say, today you're working zone 1, and then tomorrow you're working zone 2, and Friday you're working zone 3. Okay, so I can assign that person to as many different jobs for different days as I need to. And as I mentioned before, I can assign them to other things as well. If we're assigning cars to people, I can go in and I can assign the car that that person is going to use on each of those days. And if you're using it for anything else, radios, or if you entered AEDs or tasers, those items would all show here as well. Okay. As you drag and drop these items over to those blocks, it's saving that information. So there's no need to click Save when you're done. It's updating that as you drag them over. As we mentioned before, you could switch to another employee using the drop-down here if you wanted to. And once you're done, you can just go ahead and leave that screen. So if I wanted to check and see the jobs that I had assigned to people, I can go back to the daily schedule, and I can see that information here. Bill's been assigned to Zone 1, and for today, he's been assigned to use Car 1 and Taser 1 as well. Okay, so that is going in and assigning our employees to their jobs or other schedule details that you may want to show on the schedule. Another change that we can make to the schedule as a supervisor is we can adjust someone's start and end times. So if somebody's schedule is being adjusted, maybe we need someone to come in as the early car or a late car, and we have to adjust the hours that they're going to be working that day. We have two options on how to do that. The first one I'll show you is great for making updates for one day at a time. So maybe I want to go in and I want to adjust Andrew's hours just for today's night shift. I can click on his name, and I'll get an option here in the Schedule Actions menu to change schedule times. Okay, that's going to bring up this pop-up screen. It actually shows me everybody on the shift, and I can go in here where it says start time and end time, and I can adjust their start and end time. So maybe this is going to be 1700 to 0500. I can make changes to other employees if I wanted to while I'm in here. When I'm done, I click Save, and that is going to update that on our schedule here to show that that person's start and end time have been adjusted. So now I can tell by looking at the schedule that his hours will be a little different than the other people on that shift. Okay, so clicking on the person's name and using change schedule times in the Schedule Actions menu, again, is a great way to change people's times for one day at a time. It's possible in some scenarios that you may want to change someone's start and end times for a date range. Maybe this person is always going to be the early car or the late car, or is going to be the early car for the next month or something like that. Or maybe we just want to change their hours for certain days of the week for a period of time. Maybe on Fridays in the summer they come in earlier and they leave earlier or something like that. To make those types of changes, we have a screen under the Supervisor menu, and that is going to be called Change Schedule Times. Using this screen, I can set a date range that indicates how long do I want to make these adjust these times for. So maybe it's today through the end of the year, or maybe it's today through the end of the summer. And then I choose the employee or employees whose times I want to change from here, and I use the arrows here to send them over to the selected column. Down here, I can choose to only change their hours for a certain shift or for all shifts. Okay, so that might be helpful if your department has a rotation that maybe switches back and forth between days and nights. So obviously, if I'm going to change your hours to be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., I only want to do that on the day shift, not on the night shift. So I can single out a certain shift, or I can say all shifts. No matter what shift you're working, your hours should be changed to the hours I'm about to indicate. Then I can go to the next section and I can enter the start and end time. What do I want to change these hours to? And the last item is a spot where I can choose what days of the week do I want to change the start and end times for. Again, that could be helpful if maybe just one day of the week we want to change their start and end times. Or if it's all days of the week, I can go ahead and choose them all. Once I have that all completed, then I can click this refresh button here, and that will go and it will refresh that person's schedule for every day in that date range and have it reflect those new start and end times. Okay, so when we're dealing with start and end times, we have two options there, one for one day at a time, and one for a longer period of time, a date range of a week or a month or a year. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about those couple of schedule adjustments, either assigning people to their jobs and schedule details, or adjusting their start and end times for one day at a time or for an extended period of time? Okay. All right, I don't see any questions coming through, so we'll move on to our next topic, which is going to be dealing with time off. Now, there's a couple of different scenarios where you might be dealing with time off. You may need to enter a day off entry for someone who either can't put it in themselves, or maybe you want to submit your own request for time off. Or you may need to go in and approve a request or deny a request that has come in from an employee. So we'll look at all those scenarios, starting with putting an employee on a day off. Okay, so if somebody calls out, maybe they can't submit a request on the web, they don't have access, or maybe policy is that if you're calling out sick, you actually have to call in and speak to a supervisor and not just submit it from the web. Whatever the case may be, if I need to put somebody on a day off, if this person is calling and saying, I'm not going to be able to come in and work my shift tonight, I can click on that person's name, and I can go over here in our Schedule Actions menu to request time off. Okay, that's going to bring up a pop-up. It's going to have some of these screens already filled out for us. It already has the person's name and the date and the shift that they're supposed to work. All I have to do is indicate, are they taking the whole day off, or are they taking a partial day? If they're taking the whole day off, then we just leave that as entire day. But if they were taking a partial day, then we could say, well, they're just going to take some time at the beginning of their shift, first part of their shift, or some time at the second part of their shift. If I choose first or second, I get additional windows here where I can enter the start and end time for that time off. Because obviously it won't be the entire shift, it'll be just part of it. If I leave this as entire day, the system already knows that I'm taking the whole shift off. There's no need to enter the start and end time. Next item is reason. What type of time do I want to take off? And I can choose from the drop down here. So maybe they're calling out sick. There'll be a note here, it says unpaid lunch will be deducted. This reminder shows up whenever you have entire day selected as your part of day. If you have any employees that have an unpaid lunch and that's been entered into the system in the pay info screen, then this will deduct that time and not charge them from it. If the employee doesn't have unpaid lunch, then you can just ignore that warning. Nothing will happen because nothing has been entered for that employee. Next thing we have here is status. As a supervisor, I do have the ability to make this an approved day off. I don't have to submit it as a request first and then approve it later. I can just go right ahead and approve it. Then there's a space here for comments if I want to add any information here about why the person is taking the day off. It's not a required field, which is why it's not labeled in red. It's optional. But that's a free entry field. You can put anything you need to in there. And then down here there's a checkbox that says send email to defaults. I recommend you leave that checked. That means that the system will automatically send an email in the background to whoever has been set as the email, as the default email recipients for that person's group. So what that usually means is it will notify the employee that their day off has been approved. Maybe some other people get notified as well, supervisors or somebody else, but leaving that checked means that that email will happen automatically in the background. Once I've completed these items up here, I just go down to the bottom and I click Save. And that's going to bring us back to our shift there. And we'll see that it's now displaying that that person is on a sick day. We see the day off code over here. And they're highlighted in green, which is the color that was set for an approved sick day. Okay. So that's how you can go in and enter someone or put someone on a day off. If you needed to request a day off for yourself or for any other employee, you could click on the person's name and fill that same information out as we saw. You can also get to that by going into the employee menu. And we have a schedule time off option here. And it's all the same type of information. that we would enter here. Again, I choose the person's name. I can set my date range. I can say it's for all shifts that they're working, or I can identify a specific shift. And I can also go in and identify the part of day, the reason, and then I can make it a request or approved. So it's possible that I might go in and submit a day off request for myself. And maybe I want to put in for a couple days off. Of vacation time. I can submit it as a request and leave that check to send my emails. And now that request has been submitted and will be waiting for approval by my supervisor. Requests also show on the daily schedule as well. So if we look ahead here, you'll see a request on the screen, highlighted in blue, which in this case is the color we set for requested vacation time. If I wanted to approve somebody's day off, the best way for me to do that is going to be to go to the day that they've requested off. This allows me to review what else is going on that day. Do we already have somebody off that would prevent me from giving this person the day off? Or maybe there's people on training, or maybe we're just short because of the way that our schedule falls. Those things may play into whether or not I'm going to approve this day off entry. When I've decided if I'm going to go ahead and approve it or deny it, I can click on the entry, and I can go here to change time off. And that will just let me go in and update that request that was submitted. So I can change anything I need to here, but probably the most important thing would be that I can change the status. I can make this approved or denied, or approved with stipulation if your department is using that. Again, I have the option to add some comments there if I need to. Otherwise, I can just come down here and I can click Save. Again, if I leave that checked, that's going to send an email to that employee letting them know that their day off was approved. And we have it there on the schedule again in green. Finally, if we had a day off entry in the system and that person was no longer going to take that day off, maybe they changed their mind, or I don't know, they submitted it for the wrong day or something, and we want to remove it from the system, we can click on that day off entry, and we'll get an option here for delete time off. It'll ask us, are we sure you want to remove this time off record? And if we click remove, it will take it off of the schedule, and it will immediately put that time back into that employee's bank. Okay? So those are a couple of scenarios that a supervisor might have to encounter with time off, either requesting their own time off, entering a time off entry for another employee who maybe can't put it in themselves, approving a request from an employee, And finally, deleting a day off, removing it from the system. Does anybody have any questions about any of those items? Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the next topic, which is going to be talking about how a supervisor would deal with overtime entries. So we're going to look at some basic overtime entries. As I said before, we're not going to look at things like replacement policy or open shifts. If your department is going to use those items, you can sign up for classes that deal specifically with them. What we're going to look at here is just maybe entering somebody in on overtime that you've chosen to work, either because they're the only person who can do it, or you have some type of method outside of the system where you choose who's going to work the overtime. We're also going to look at how you could put in a request if you had to work overtime and it had to be approved by someone. You can put in a request saying that you worked. And then we're going to look at how you can approve requests and delete overtime if it needs to be removed from the system. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and enter overtime for someone. Okay, so when Sergeant Lopez called out, that may have made us short for our shift. We might now need to replace Sergeant Lopez with another sergeant. Now, once I've chosen who I want to work this overtime, I can go ahead and place it on the schedule by clicking on any employee in that block. And go into the bottom section here where it says Patrol Night Shift. I have an option here for Schedule Overtime. And I can just fill this information out so that way that employee appears on the schedule as filling that overtime. Because we clicked on the shift, some of the information is already filled out here, like the date and the shift. I just have to choose the employee's name. And then I have to choose a reason. Why did we have this overtime? Well, in this scenario, we were short-staffed. It was for staffing shortage. And then we can choose how they're going to be paid. The options that you have here for pay type will vary depending on what reason you choose, because it is possible to have certain pay types available for only certain overtime reasons. So in this case here, for staffing shortage, my options are time and a half cash or time and a half comp time. I'll choose the cash there. And then I can enter the hours that they worked overtime. So maybe it was 1800 to 0600. Like it says here, I can leave the hours blank. The system will figure out the math for me. And down here where it says status, again, because I'm a supervisor, I have the ability to go in and make this an approved overtime. I know that we've told this person that we need them to come in and work, so I can just go ahead and approve it right there. There's a space down here for comments or reason text. Just like with time off, this is an optional field. It's not required. And again, if we leave this box checked, the system will automatically send out emails to whoever was set to receive them for approved overtime. Once we have those items filled out, we're going to click Save here. And that's going to place that overtime entry on our schedule. So I can see that we now have this Sergeant Peters coming in to work for Sergeant Lopez, staffing shortage, and the hours that he'll be working. Okay, so that's how I can just go ahead and place someone on overtime on the schedule. The other scenario might be a case where you may need to put in a request for yourself to have worked overtime. Maybe you had to stay late at the end of one of your shifts, and you had to, maybe it was for report writing or a late call that you had to attend to, and you have to put in a slip saying that you worked certain hours and that you need to get paid for that. So you can do that by doing it the way we just saw, by clicking on the shift and entering the information. Or you also have an option under the employee menu, which is called Request Overtime Payment. It's a very similar screen. Okay, it's going to default to my name. I go ahead and choose the date that I worked the overtime. I choose the shift, the reason, my pay type, and then my hours. You know, I was supposed to be there until 1900, but I had to stay until 20. Again, this will recalculate the hours for me. I can leave that alone. But in this scenario, I may submit it as a request. Maybe it has to be approved by someone else. I can enter my comments, leave this box checked to send my email, and click Save. Our request has been saved, and that will start to show up on our daily schedule as well. Now, if you were a supervisor who had to go in and approve that request, again, you could just go to that day and click on it, and you'll have an option there for change overtime. Now, in this case, you can make any adjustments that you might need to. Change the pay type, change the hours, and so on. But if you just want to go ahead and approve it or deny it, you just change the status. You can add or edit comments if you needed to. Leave the box checked to send your emails, and click Save. And that goes from a requested overtime to an approved one. Okay. If your department has a lot of overtime requests, if there's a lot of late call overtime or overtime where people have to hang over a little bit, and you have a lot of those requests that you want to approve, we do have a tool in the supervisor menu called Manage Overtime. And this will actually let you run a search. You can set a date range here. You can filter it for certain employees, certain reasons, or certain groups. And you can say, let me see all the requests that are out there. And if there are any, they will be listed in this area here. We don't have any requests right now, but I can change my status to all, and I can see that the overtimes are listed here. What's nice about this screen is you can go down and change the statuses. So if they were all requested, I can go in and I can change them to be approved or denied. And then I can hit save. So instead of going to each individual day, that's a little bit of a faster way to go in and approve those overtime requests. We do have the same option available, manage time off. So you can do it with time off as well. A lot of places don't use that for approving time off because usually you need to see what else is going on that day, who else is off, who's on training, things like that before you decide if you can give somebody the day off. But if it's something that would be helpful for you, you can use manage time off as well. And going back to our daily schedule, if you have to get rid of an overtime, if it was entered by mistake or was no longer needed, again, you can click on the overtime entry, and you will have an option here for delete overtime. Are you sure you want to remove this overtime entry? Hit remove, and it comes off of the schedule. Okay. So those are our couple of overtime scenarios, either entering someone on overtime or requesting overtime for yourself or someone else. Then we talked about approving an overtime request, either by updating the overtime or using manage overtime. And finally, we talked about deleting an overtime entry that you no longer need on the schedule. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about any of those overtime items? Okay. Next couple of items we'll talk about are switches or substitutions. Okay, if your department allows people to do a switch, where we might say, I'm going to work for you today, you're going to work for me tomorrow, or I'm going to work for you today, you're going to work for me some other time, we'll figure it out later. We have some options in the system on how we can display that information. First of all, if your department is using switch or substitution, it is possible to have your employees submit a request to say that they want to switch or substitute with someone. Those requests will need to be approved or denied by a supervisor. So a supervisor can go under the supervisor menu here, and they can go to change request switch status. And you can set a date range here and hit refresh and look for any requests that might have been entered in that date range. Don't we have any in here right now? I'll go ahead and put one in real quick. Let's see. There we go. So if we have a request in the system here, then when we come into this screen here, if there's any request, they'll show up like that. So I can see the status, the first person's name, the date that they were working in their shift. I can see the other person's name, the date that they were working in their shift. And I can see who requested it and when. I can hit the arrow here to open it up and see all that information about it. And I have the options here to either approve that request, deny it, or delete the request altogether. So if I'm going to go ahead and approve that and say it's okay, I can click approve. That'll say that our switch request has been approved, and it will notify both employees that the switch has been approved. And that will be reflected on your schedule. So if we look at tomorrow, you'll see Officer Ferguson working for Officer Coleman, and over here, Officer Coleman working for Officer Ferguson. Okay, so if your department is having your employees request your switches, that's how you can go in and approve them. Now, the other scenario might be that we're not allowing employees to go in and submit a request. And someone may come to you and say, hey, me and someone else are going to switch with each other. You can enter that for them by going to the day that one of them is working and the shift and clicking on their name. And you'll have an option here for substitute, switch, or reciprocate. Okay. Now, depending on what your department is using, switch or substitute is here, which again, you could have the employee's request. But some departments want to use reciprocate, which can't be requested. The difference is reciprocate is an official change to the schedule. So some departments need to use that for payroll purposes because we need to report the actual hours that somebody worked in a pay period. A switch or a substitute is an unofficial switch. So if you work for me today, those hours still belong to me from like a payroll point of view. We would still report that I worked today for payroll. Okay. So whichever one of those your department is going to use, you just want to be consistent in using it. Again, we'll click on the person's name, go to substitute, switch, reciprocate. We'll choose whichever one it is that we use, reciprocate or switch, or substitute if it's open-ended, where we just say, I'm going to work for you today, you pay me back sometime down the line. Okay, I choose their name from the list here, the date that they're working, and the shift that they're working, and this just says we're going to cover each other's shifts. And then I hit save. And that will reflect on our schedule the same way it did when we approved the request. Okay. So Officer Patterson for Officer Novak, and Officer Novak for Officer Patterson. Okay. Those are two different ways that you might work with switches or substitutions in your department, either by approving a request that comes in or by just entering it on the schedule for the employees. Any questions about those? Okay. All right. Just a few more items to show you. A couple of general schedule actions that we haven't covered yet. If I click on the schedule on someone's name, I have an option here for add comments. This will allow me to enter a comment that will appear next to someone's name. I just go over here, and I can start typing. This is free entry field, any information that I want to enter, have it show next to that employee's name. Maybe something they're doing that day or whatever it might be. So I just go in here and I start typing. I can put notes next to other employees as well if I like. And then I can hit save at the bottom. And that comment displays to the right of that person's name under the details section. Okay. Those comments can be seen by anybody who has access to the daily schedule. So they're not private just to supervisors or anything along those lines. Anyone who has access to the daily schedule can see them. You just want to keep that in mind when you're putting them in. If you need to get rid of them, just click on the person's name again. Go back to add comments. And you can just edit or delete the comment and click save. Another item we have is move employee. If we click on someone's name, we can go to move employee. And this will allow us to take that person and change their date and or shift that they're working. So maybe we're short on night shift. I need Officer Coleman to come in on the same day, but just come in and work night shift. So this says we're going from 7:20 day shift to 7:20 night shift. And if I click save, that will remove him from day shift and move him to the night shift. Okay, I just moved them on the same day to different shifts, but you could use that to change the day that they're working as well. Maybe he's working today, but he's supposed to be off tomorrow, and you want him to come in tomorrow and be off today. You can just change the date there and hit save. Just keep in mind that whenever you move an employee, it's going to generate an email to them, letting them know that their schedule has been changed. So you may just want to make sure that you are ready to move that person before you go ahead and save that entry. Okay. And the last item here is view entry. If I click on someone's name, I have an option here for view entry. This lets me get a little additional information about that person, what's going on with that person for that day. So in this case here, this person just has a regular work day. Just tells me it's a work day, their hours, their shift, and so on. But if I click on somebody who's got an overtime entry, and I do view entry, I'll be able to see things like the timestamps. So when that overtime was requested, when it was approved, who approved it, the pay type, any additional comments that were added, I can see that in there. And same thing with a day off entry. Day off entry will have their regular work day here, but then it'll have their day off entry below it. So for the day off entry, again, I can see the timestamps, who requested it, who approved it, and when. Any comments or reason text that was added to the day off entry will appear there as well. So that's the view entry option here on the schedule actions menu. Okay. Any questions about those last couple of schedule actions? Adding a comment, moving an employee, or viewing an entry? Okay. Last couple of things to show you are just a few reports. We have a number of different reports available on the web. They can be found under the reports menu. And they're mostly all run in a similar fashion, so I'll just show you, maybe 2 or 3 of the reports. One popular one is a time off activity report. And again, most of our reports run in this fashion. So I choose the report. I identify the date range that I want to run the report for. And then I go in and I choose which employees I want to run the report for. And what time off reasons do I want to run the report for? So I can narrow it down to just certain ones, or I can choose them all. And there are some additional filter options here that are available. I can filter by status. Let me just see the approved or requested or whatever. When I hit search, that's going to return all of that information in this report. So for each employee, I can see their group, their name, the time off reason, the status, the date, the shift, the start time, the end time, the number of hours. Over here, I have an image. I can view it as a pie chart, or I can view it as a bar graph. I can save that image using the button here, or I can hide it if I want to just focus on the report itself. As far as the report goes, I can either save it as a PDF or as an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so most of the reports here run kind of similar to that. Another example would be the overtime activity report. Set my date range, choose my employees, choose my overtime reasons, and hit search. Okay. One report that's a little bit different than the other ones, it's run a little bit differently, is the employee statistical report. Okay. This report allows me to run it for one employee at a time. It defaults to the current schedule dates, which are usually the calendar year or the fiscal year, depending on how your department operates. But I can change those dates if I need to. And this gives us a lot of information about an employee, all compiled into one report. So we see things here like their time balances, their time off activity, their overtime activity, the administrative days log, which shows any time that's been added to or subtracted from their banks, their work trends, what days do they tend to work, what days do they tend to take off, what days do they tend to work overtime. If you're using the training module, it'll show any schools that person has been scheduled to attend. If you're using the extra duty module, it'll show any extra duty jobs that person has been assigned to. Date, vendor, description, location, start time, end time, number of hours. If you're using the court alert module, it'll have a list of all the subpoenas that were entered for that employee. And finally, at the bottom, if your department allows for any type of time sellback, that will show what type of time they sold back and how much. Okay, so that report has a lot of information all compiled into one spot. It can only be run for one person at a time, and for those reasons, it's just a little bit different than the other reports you might find on the web here. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about how to run the reports from the web page? Okay. Last thing I'll show you is on the far right here, we have a button for help and training. This opens up another tab on your browser and brings you to our support site. From here, you can access a number of articles and videos that discuss how to use different functions in the system. You can either browse by topic and just look through and find something that maybe you want to read an article on or watch a video on. Maybe I want to watch a video about the employee statistical report. So I can go ahead and click on that, and I can watch a video right from in that page there. Or if I don't feel like browsing, if I'm looking for something specific, I can go and I can search in the search bar here. If I want to read an article about using managed overtime, I can search up there and I can find an article that discusses how to use that screen. Okay, so if there's ever anything you need more information on, that's a resource that you have available to you. Again, it pops it up in a separate tab, so I could leave this open and read the article, and I could even have it open on my page here and kind of follow along with the article or the video, switching back and forth. Once I'm done with the support page, I can just close that tab, and I'll be right back here where we left off. Okay, so that resource is available to anybody who is logged in to the web page. And one more thing I'll show you, because I forgot to show you before, when we added our time off entries and our overtime entries, I just wanted to show you a little bit of how that would start to show up on your weekly or monthly schedules. So you'll see vacation day starts to show here, and here as well. And you'll also start to see those items populate on your monthly calendar and your yearly calendar. Okay. So that covers all of the topics that we have today for a basic supervisor training. Does anybody have any questions on anything that we've covered today? Any of the screens that we've looked at? Or maybe anything that we didn't cover? Is there anything that, that your supervisors might do that maybe didn't get covered today? Okay, I don't see any questions coming through, so we'll go ahead and conclude today's sessions. Thank you for attending today. As I mentioned earlier, we have a number of other classes available to sign up, including things like classes on replacement policy. So if your department is going to make use of replacement policy, you can sign up for those classes that teach you how to set it up and how to use it. And that may be something that you would incorporate into your supervisor's regular routine if they're going to use that to fill things like overtime. You can sign up for that and all of our other classes on the same site that you signed up for these items here. Also, don't forget that we have help out sessions available as well. If there's any items you need additional help with or some one-on-one time, help out sessions are 45-minute sessions that are limited to one person per session. So you'll get 45 minutes of one-on-one time with one of our trainers to go over any topics that you might need assistance with or help setting up certain items. Okay? So again, thank you for your time today. If there's no other questions, then I'll go ahead and shut down this session.